Karen Calloway. Welcome to the Career Story Vodcast. In fiction writing, there exists a classic hero's journey, a sort of template writers use that involves a hero who goes on an adventure, learns a lesson, wins a victory with that newfound knowledge, and returns home transformed. What I've learned is that we also have a career journey. I'm interviewing people who I think have had extraordinary careers to learn about when they launched their career, what obstacles they faced, and their lessons learned. Today, I'm thrilled to have as my guest, Ron James. Ron James is a comedian who has been selling out theaters in Canada for more than 20 years. His career spans from here in Nova Scotia, where he grew up, to Toronto, LA, and then back here to Canada. He's done comedy festivals, written and starred in television shows and specials, won numerous comedy awards, and has written a book called All Over the Map, Rambles of Rumination from the Canadian Road. And he went to Acadia University with my Uncle Peter, which is how I landed this interview. Welcome, Ron.
Thank you very much.
Let's go back to how and why you got into comedy in the first place.
Well, it was a calling and not a choice. Although I've been funny in the kitchen and classroom my entire life, and I was surrounded by people who had great senses of humor, whether it was my parents or friends or relations. I saw Saturday Night Live in 1977 at Acadia, and it was like boom. And I'd seen Monty Python, Search of the Holy Grail 3 years prior, which was really the Rosetta Stone of inspired anarchy. And at that point in time, there was a great renaissance in stand-up as well. Robin Williams came into the field, and Steve Martin was a galvanizing influence on so many. And it was a great time to believe that this could be a calling, that this could be a career, actually, which made me a bit of an anomaly at Acadia because everybody was going into business or engineering, legitimate careers, you know. But I had a mentor at the time when I was doing I did a couple of plays, and her name was Evelyn Garbery. And she said, more or less what Joseph Campbell said, follow your bliss, do what you're meant to do, or what you know you need to do, and everything will fall in place. That doesn't guarantee that you'll get work in this business where shelf lives are very short. But the 17 years I spent as an actor and the 3 years I spent in Los Angeles were crucial in making me take charge of my own career and develop my stand-up act and hone the skills that I had naturally growing up, because it is an exponential leap from the kitchen and classroom to being a professional on stage. I went to Los Angeles to do a series for Ronnie Howard's company that we created at Second City, which is where I started as an improviser. This was the theater in Toronto, it was a branch plant of Chicago, really, where it started in '59, I think. And it spawned everybody and anybody who made an impact in ensemble comedy. Harold Ramis, Bill Murray, John Candy, Gilda Radner, Dan Aykroyd, Mike Myers, who was in my company. Steve Carell came from there, of course.
That's amazing.
It's just amazing, the people that came from there. It was challenging, it was rewarding, and it was bittersweet in its own way, because even though you learned and developed stage confidence and skills and more than a rudimentary understanding of the mathematical equation of comedy with a beginning, a middle, and an end, everyone had their eye on the prize, being Saturday Night Live or fame. And as you get older, what I love about being 64 is that doesn't matter anymore. And it hasn't mattered for a long, long time for me. What's mattered is the work. And what's mattered for me once I moved into stand-up from ensemble work was it allows you to line the planets up and make sense of the chaos we're walking through in the language of laughs on your own terms. And it became empowering in its own right, so that you became more comfortable in your own skin over time. But that's not to say one doesn't incur battle wounds and a thicker skin. It's you're constantly testing yourself in all kinds of arenas. And just because you had a standing ovation the night before doesn't mean you're going to get the same the night after.
I read your book. It intertwines in so many places. It's such a beautiful book, but
Thank you.
You weave in the history so well. So there's some seriousness to the book, even though you're
Yes, there is. Thank you. I wrote this book as really a love letter to the country I traveled and the people I'm from. And, you know, I was able to say some things about my uncle who was homeless on the streets of Toronto with alcohol dependency back in the late 60s, early 70s, who redeemed himself and won his sobriety. I was able to talk about my province that I'm from, that I love, that I never forgot, that I carried with me in every corner of the country I performed. I was able to talk about days gone by, camping in Ingonish with my family during the moon landing, meeting Americans for the first time. I was able to share, and if you pardon the phrase, an inside baseball perspective on the business and the wins and losses and the challenges that my tribe of solo acts deals with all the time.
You talked about, so in terms of we all have obstacles we face, but you talked about being diagnosed with ADHD like quite later on.
Yeah.
So how is that? Must have made a lot of sense to you afterwards, but how have you managed that now?
Well, I take 5 milligrams of Cipralex every day, which certainly helps. But I try not to find myself in situations where I've got too many plates spinning at once, unless it's on stage where you're cutting and pasting at the speed of thought. And they told me that apparently that's one of the assets of ADHD. And you're capable up there at that. It's the day-to-day functions that get in the way. I mean, you're easily, oh, look, a squirrel, and you're off, right? And so I make lists. Lists really help. So I scratch them off throughout the day. I exercise, you know, stay healthy. You know, I still like to drink, but I don't drink too much. I put an awful lot of that behind me as I got older. And, you know, I try to watch the fight or flight response, try not to get too preoccupied and you know, chew on things. You know, there's strategies of coping that you can incorporate that, you know, try not to shoot for perfection in the everyday, right?
Yeah. What was fascinating though is that it didn't bother you it actually is an asset on stage. That's
interesting, isn't it?
Interesting. Yeah.
And once COVID came calling, it was actually a balm to the soul to pull out my journals that I diligently kept all those early years on the road before social media became so omnipresent. And, you know, you felt compelled to take a picture of the French fries you were eating in Fort St. John and post it on Instagram before you felt compelled to not collate, but share everything that went on in the run of a day. Instead, when people spoke to me, I wrote it all down.
I'm going to end on this because obviously you still have some things happening, a couple of big projects. Do you want to tell us about what's next?
I do. Well, first of all, I've got an 18-day tour across the Canadian West that begins in Portage La Prairie. I love that name. November the 17th and wraps up in Calgary on December the 9th. I've got my own little project called One Man's Treasure, where I have found the map to Oak Island Gold in an old dory I bought.
Yay, that's going to be so good.
I hope so. And then I get to shoot another 5 series, which I did last year, that got a sterling review in the Globe and Mail by John Doyle, written by a comedian from Halifax by the name of Nathan McIntosh, from Fairview, actually, who's been working in New York as a stand-up for the last 10 years. Brilliant young comedian, very funny. 30 years my junior, and what everybody is now that we're in our 60s. Jeez. And that's called Trapped. And I play a real cranky shoe store owner who's got a store called the Toe Shelf. And I've got a couple corporate gigs. I'm performing for the Atlantic. I do corporate speaking too, and so, well, corporate comedy. I'm sure you're far more sedate behind the podium than I am when I cut the mic. And I love the corporate work because 98% of the time it's a great audience. For the Atlantic Lobster Association, and a couple more corporate gigs. So that's good, because the 2 years of fallow existence during COVID were exhausting. They went fast in retrospect, but I did shows from my living room. I kept active. I kept engaged with my fan base, and I didn't want my muscle to atrophy. And that's what was nice about writing the book. It was a nice bright light at the end of a long tunnel. And to reach into my banker's box with my journals and read about the places and the people I had the good fortune to meet and know, if briefly, in my travels, was a testimony to the road traveled. And I feel very, very fortunate to have had that opportunity.
Thank you so much. Thanks for joining. Thanks for writing the book. It's wonderful. And just for continuing, because we love watching you. And I can't wait to see the Oak Island in particular, because it's my favorite. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A pleasure talking to you, and say hi to Wally.